Welcome all for the 7th edition of the Geoscience and Remote Sensing Society Young Professionals and the International Society of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing Student Consortium Summer School. Well, this year we will have webinars, roundtables, and tutorials with hands-on. And these editions is organized actually by two Santa Catarina State universities, UDESC and UNO Chapecó. This event is supported by two scientific societies, the Geoscience and Remote Sensing Society and the International Society of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing, and their student branch, the Young Professional one and the Student Consortium. We welcome you all to visit our main page and to answer actually the quiz with some particularities of the Santa Catarina state and the southern part of Brazil country, and also the welcome words of the two presidents of the two scientific societies and our rectors. This event is also supported by our state foundation, FAPESC, and two private companies, Geoassessoria Canoinhas and Instituto Gilson Volpato de Educação Científica. Our partners for promoting these events are different institutions and universities in Brazil. And so far, we have delivered 6 webinars, 2 roundtables, and 2 tutorials. Today, we will have a special talk with Dr. Marguerite Madden from the University of Georgia. And we also invite you for this Thursday with Dr. Daya Sagar for another webinar entitled Mathematical Morphology and Processing and Analysis of Digital Elevation Models. For November 18th, global tutorial with hands-on entitled Global Vegetation Trend, a multi-decade planetary coverage and analysis ready product with Dr. Leandro Parenti. And then on November 23, SAR polarimetry and multitemporal SAR statistical descriptions with Dr. Carlos Lopez Martinez from Spain. Well, for today webinars, I will just invite Professor Eliana Lima da Fonseca. She is Associate Professor at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, and her expertise is actually on vegetation and remote sensing. So Eliana, please feel free to introduce our moderators for today's sessions and also our distinguished lecture.
Thank you, Veraldo. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session. I would like to introduce my Brazilian colleagues, Professor Fábio Brenuing from UFSM and Dr. Ricardo Dallagnol from INPE. We share this moderation, and I would like to introduce Dr. Marguerite Madden from University of Georgia in United States. She is professor and director of the Center of Geospatial Research. She worked with GIS science and landscape ecology applied to biological and physical process. And she worked also with human-animal impacts on the environment. Professor Marguerite, welcome. Thank you for accepting our invitation. It is an honor to have you here to share your knowledge with us. The table is all yours. Please.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm very excited to be a part of this summer school. I'll go ahead and share my screen. and maximize my presentation. Okay. Okay, so how does that look?
Very good.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for the introduction, Elena. I'd like to talk today about a project that I just love. We've been working on it for about 4 years, I think. And basically geospatial analysis to mitigate human-elephant conflict in Southern Africa. And I'm actually part of a research group, so I'd love to just acknowledge my colleagues and also the Research Council of Zimbabwe for our permit to do the research and their support. We represent a few different universities in the United States and also an NGO, Connected Conservation, and another NGO, the Victoria Falls Wildlife Trust. Both are very actively involved in putting GPS collars on bull elephants. So that's what I'll be talking about today. But also U.S. Forest Service and other parks within Zimbabwe. So Connected Conservation is the NGO that has been supporting buying the GPS collars, collecting the data, doing a lot of the groundwork. So you could go to their website and meet everybody. Malvern Cardozo in the upper left corner, he lives in Victoria Falls, and he is the person the Zimbabwe parks will call when there's a problem. And there are a lot of problems with bull elephants. And especially after COVID, because of lockdown, and there's many more wild animals are going into populated areas. We think because there's fewer tourists, just people are staying inside more, and the wildlife are just coming into developed areas more often. William Langbauer is a specialist in elephant behavior, and especially he helped to identify infrasound communication with elephants, so I'll be talking about that. Andrea Presotto was my PhD student, and you might be able to tell she's from Brazil originally. She's now an associate professor at the University of Salisbury in Maryland. Myself and Loki Osborne, Dr. Loki Osborne, he lives in Cape Town, Africa. He heads the Connected Conservation, so he and Malvern are our people in Zimbabwe. And then there's an excellent group of local researchers and field attendants. And then Roger Perry is our veterinarian who does the darting and the hard work of putting the elephants to sleep so we can put the collars on. So I'd also like to acknowledge my research group at the Center for Geospatial Research at the University of Georgia in the Department of Geography, and especially right in the center, Dr. Sergio Bernardes, who you might tell is also from Brazil originally. And he is the Associate Director of CGR. And much of the work I'll be showing is his research. So I really want to acknowledge his contributions. So my objectives today, our research is to understand elephant movements and linkages to development, local communal farming, and drought or other climate impacts towards mitigating, and mitigating means really lessening or trying to remove human-elephant conflict in Africa. Our work combines geospatial technologies of remote sensing, photogrammetry, and geovisualization, and we analyze spatial temporal patterns of animal movements and habitat condition that we hope ultimately aids decision makers, such as the resource managers from the national parks, the managers of game reserves, developers, local government officials, local tribal members who are representing the interests of the communal tribal lands and also subsistence farmers. So just a note before I begin, I know your summer school is very involved with exciting research in artificial intelligence, deep learning, machine learning, all kinds of automation, which we absolutely need to be able to process and understand and manage the fire hose of data that we have now. But I'd also like you to remember always the power of visualization, and that seeing is believing and understanding. So in order to understand our imagery, the processing and the products of our geospatial analyses, from basic image enhancement and classification to feature extraction and advanced algorithms in deep learning, we really need to understand the image features before we process and during and after processing. The image interpretation is critical to assess the quality of the output. And I would like you all to remember that we each bring our life experiences, our perceptions, our values, where we live, anywhere we traveled, the books we've read, our own personal experiences to our computer screens. And we have amazing brains. So we can filter, we can understand the imagery, and then we need to bring that into our algorithms and try to replicate what we're doing in our thoughts when we're analyzing and viewing the images. So the motivation for our research is many factors, but one especially is climate change and drought in Africa. We are seeing a shift in the dry season, wet season, the periodicity, when the rains begin seem to be later. The dry season seems to be prolonged. Sometimes the rains don't even come, such as in 2019. There was a tremendous drought, and that affects people, their livelihoods, agriculture, their food security, and also the habitat for wildlife. So you can imagine it just drives wildlife into agricultural areas. It also caused a tremendous elephant dieback in 2019, and actually there were over 300 elephants killed, especially in Botswana. And a theory is that the water holes dry up, very hot, there's a lot of growth of algae, and cyanobacteria produce neurotoxins that kill elephants and people and livestock. And we definitely lost some of our bull elephants, we believe, to cyanobacteria. So I'd like to just give you a little background that our work today builds on prior studies, and especially like to acknowledge Dr. Richard Verhosken, who was a large animal veterinarian at our university. And very early on in the mid-1990s, he put GPS collars on dyads of female and their calves to track their movements. He was involved in research looking at sterilization of elephants, because the elephants in Kruger National Park were overpopulated, and the way they controlled them is with culling, which is having professional hunters kill all of the elephants in a family group in order to keep the population within their carrying capacity. It's a very, very drastic measure. The alternative is to have elephants overpopulated and starving. So the culling was just a horrible, but maybe sometimes necessary management technique. So he was trying sterilization instead. There was criticism that the mothers would not take care of their babies, but we had the GPS data to show that the mothers and the babies stayed together at all times. So he laid the groundwork for this research, and then Dr. Andrea Persoto, I met her when we went to Brazil to study capuchin monkeys and their behavior using tools to crack palm nuts. This happens in the Cerrado, a very dry area. Just fascinating. Her research fascinating. She needed to follow the monkeys because they're too small to really put GPS collars on them. And they didn't want to. So she followed the monkeys. She did research on cognition, spatial cognition, and navigation techniques. And then she decided, that was her PhD work, she decided to get a second PhD. So she came from Sao Paulo and joined us, and she used the elephant data to compare their movements and their behavior with the monkey behavior related to habitat conditions. So her articles are fascinating if you want to look. And at the end of this talk, I have her citations. I had a master's student also looking at the same elephant data in Kruger National Park, and her work is cited here, and she was looking at core areas and how they navigate differently when they move to a new area and they're in an area they don't know. So there's two different methods of navigation called allo and egocentric navigation. So this work also builds on our long history of doing vegetation inventories, mapping at high details, dating back to, my work dates back to the 1970s, but here in Georgia in the 1990s. And really drilling in and mapping vegetation from aerial imagery at a very high level of detail. These are two national parks in the United States. And then more recently, we've been using drones and structure from motion or multi-image matching to create very fine scale 3D point clouds and orthomosaics and digital surface models combined with multispectral sensors. Very low cost systems. We use DJI quadcopters with the MicaSense sensor strapped on. And this is the work of Sergio Bernardez. So I hope you look up his work as well. We've done some work here at the University of Georgia, creating 3D models. Also virtual and augmented reality, which I think is, the geovisualization has a part to play in especially science communication and outreach and excitement in science education. So we brought this around to our study. This is, we can bring up a virtual reality 3D model of cities and display on our video wall and have multiple headsets of augmented reality in the the Microsoft augmented reality goggles. So coming to this research, we're centered on an area where 5 countries come together. This is called the Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area. Kind of a mouthful, so we call it CAZA. And our study is centered on Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe. So it's a very famous wonder of the world, a tourist destination, a sacred place for tribal groups that live there, have lived there traditionally. And just to orient you, so this area is considered Southern Africa. And if we zoom into Zimbabwe, it's really where Zambia and Botswana and Namibia come together and meet Zimbabwe in the Horn of Zimbabwe. And if we zoom in, this is a Zambezi River, and you begin to see, you can see where the falls are. The lighter colored area, those are very small fields. This is the communal lands, and this is subsistence farming for the most part. And at the south end is the airport. So just to orient you, and there are national parks and game reserves in this area. And then to zoom into Victoria Falls, It's not a very big city. It's actually very small, and you can see in the north part, it's very green. So this is an area with gardens and irrigation and a lot of fruit trees and water that the elephants will be attracted to, especially during the dry season. There's a small commercial area right in the center where that red marker is. And then to the south, there's been expansion of residential growth. And to the west, you can see some new roads that have been laid out. And this is an area of future development as well. In the very, very bottom, you see a little dark area. This is the water treatment plant and the dump site where all of the waste is gathered, and this is also an attraction for elephants. So this is the kind of the study area that I'll be talking about. So the conflict, there are many, many different kinds of conflict, and it is bull elephants, or the male elephants, that are a big problem. They are kicked out of their family groups when they're teenagers, and they're upset. They don't know what to do. Their hormones are raging. They tend to band together with other male elephants, other bulls. So say from the age of about 15 or 16 years old until maybe they're 45 years old, their strategy is to eat as much as they can and grow and get as big as they can so that they can challenge the big bulls who live in mostly the national parks and are breeding with the family groups. So you can imagine the lush vegetation in agricultural fields as an attraction. They can come into a field and remove all the crop in one night, take the entire year's salary of a farmer and destroy it in one night. So typically they would kill the problem animal. They butcher the animal, they share the meat, every part is used, but there'll be another elephant coming behind them or another family group. So it's really not solving the problem. Also, they come into town, they do attack people, they have killed people. And in fact, in the last month, I know of 3 people who have been killed in Zimbabwe in our study area alone. Not by our elephants, thank goodness, but sometimes it'll be a female protecting the little ones. Tourists get too close. The bulls are very unpredictable, and there's a lot of interesting information about the psychology of bulls that have experienced the culling and the violence when they were very young. Not being raised in a family, social structure, also not being around older bulls, and there's a lot of hormonal feedback that keeps them from becoming aggressive. And when they don't have that, their period of, it's called must, lasts longer, and they're more aggressive and more brazen. So this is one of our bulls, bull number 2. He's walking down the center street in Victoria Falls. You can see the GPS unit behind his ears on the top of his head. He's a big bull, and there's one in front of him. So we collared number 2 early on, and he's on his 3rd GPS collar now, so we're continuing to track him. This issue has been there for a while, but Andrea Persoto brought a number of us together. We started having Skype calls in the beginning, and then we were able to go to Victoria Falls in 2017, 2018, and 2019. Unfortunately, not in 2020 and not this year, but we hope to go back as soon as we're able to because of the pandemic. So it's an excellent group of researchers who are working with local guardians, who are liaison between the local tribes, the communal tribes, and the researchers and natural resource managers. So we have collared 17 bulls to date. The first year we went there, we were ready and trained to go out to help with the collaring. but the president, Mugabe, came to Victoria Falls and we could not continue. There were no helicopters or there was restrictions on our movements. So we left, but as soon as we left in early September, they were able to collar 5 bulls. The next year, 5 more. The following year, you can see there's 1 lion that was collared and with one of our GPS units. And then in 2019, we had another 5. And then more, just recently, we've had 4 more. So we've been able to afford to get about 5 GPS collars at a time. Each one costs about $4,000. But we have entered into another project, a continuation of our project, which we call disruptive darting research. And so the last 4, and then we had, actually there have been 5 because Bull 2 has been recollared, have all had a treatment with chili wax. So I'll be describing that in just a moment. You can see some of these are grayed out, and they are the bulls, unfortunately, who have died. Some from poaching, some from cyanobacteria toxicity, some the collars, 1 collar just fell off, and then also the batteries going dead. So we can still locate them using triangulation, and there's a radio signal that is given off. We just don't have the GPS points, but we do dart the elephants and take the collar off when the batteries run out. So when I was there in 2019, we were trying to find a bull elephant, but they found a lion instead. So they asked if we could use one of the collars. And so this is a lioness. So that was exciting. The lion was nearby, and there's also an elephant nearby. So we stayed in our cars, but then we were able to come out. And I sent a text to my brothers and sisters, said we put a GPS collar on a lion today, but don't tell Mom. We track our elephant movements using an app on our cell phones. So when we're there, we're able to bring up the collar of particular bulls and see where they're located. We can drive and try to find them. So we've been able to locate, especially Bull 2 quite often. He circles Victoria Falls, sometimes goes into town. So we can and then we can recover the GPS tracks as well to bring them into GIS. One thing we have noted is that they do very often go to the dump site. They eat garbage. There was not a very good fence around it for a while. Now they do have an electric fence, but electricity, just supplying electricity to the fence is an issue. They definitely drink water from the water treatment plants here and also in Livingston in Zambia. So they are eating garbage. And this was an image Malvern took of their dung, which you can see the plastic is mixed in. So they are ingesting plastic, batteries, wire, broken glass, herbicides, fertilizer, chemicals. They have very, very strong guts, and a lot of this is processed through their digestive system, but it also perforates their inner organs sometimes and leads to toxicity and death. So we just were curious how much plastic they might be ingesting. So we just took, this is Sergio Bernardez. He took the image and brought it into Envy to do a segmentation, supervised classification to merge similar objects and classify them into dung, soil that had been processed, that had been processed by dung beetles, the color of different plastics, the soil, and the vegetation. And just a quick analysis found that almost 40% of this particular dung pile is made of plastic. So there's a substantial amount being ingested and then actually carried away from the dump and then redistributed throughout the environment. Some research of Dr. Langbauer, he's interested in the sounds that elephants made. So he has Swift units, which are recording all kinds of wildlife sounds, but especially the very low frequency infrasound vocalizations that we cannot hear with our ears. But if you speed up the recording, you can hear them. And he did work with Janice Poole and Katie Payne early on, Cynthia Moss, and they were able to determine with experimentation that there are particular calls that especially the female elephants are sending out when they are in heat. It takes them they're 4 years, really raising their calves, and when they are ready to breed again, they emit a particular frequency and pattern of sounds, and bull elephants will be able to pick that up because it travels very far distances in the soil. So you can read about her work. Katie Payne is at the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology, and I'll just run this. This will switch to a YouTube video.
Dear Margaret, I think Veraldo, the background team, will protect the video from YouTube.
Oh, sorry.
Great. Veraldo has replaced your presentations by the video. I think the sound was a little bit better.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Please feel free to continue your presentation. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. Let me get back to where I was. I'm just enlarging my screen again. Okay.
Perfect.
So I guess you heard the vocalizations of the elephants. And also, we do have a problem with the Swift units because the elephants often will knock down the trees, and we have to recover the units. So this is some work we're starting on now. Okay. I also have the data available to the classes that I teach. So I teach a course called Aerial Photographs and Image Analysis. And so they can use the data for their projects. They classify the land use and land cover and vegetation types. They look at the home ranges of the elephants, comparing different elephants, different ages. They look at the land uses that the elephants are moving in. They compare different vegetation conditions, also looking at vegetation indices and comparing their movements and their use of the habitats in the dry seasons and the wet seasons. This one is interesting. If you look at the blue dots, which is our elephant number 4, he got caught behind a fence for many months and had trouble finding out how to get out. Eventually he did on the backside, and he was able to be free again. In the wet season, we tend to see the distribution is more wide and spread out because there's more food available all over. In the dry season, they're really looking for wet areas and wetlands and sources of water. So, this is just a quick animation to show the dry season, going to the river quite a bit, and also seeking some more cooler temperatures. And then in the wet season, that's when the crops are available. So they'll go to the crops and raid them, and their distribution is much wider. This term, I'm teaching a first-year Odyssey class, which is first-year students. The course is meant to introduce students to professors who are doing research. So I've assigned each of the students a particular bull, and they're looking at their bull's movements, and then also related to a second bull, they're looking at wet and dry season movements. And they're using Google Earth Pro. I'll be introducing them to QGIS and also ArcGIS Pro. So it's an introduction to GIS and a little bit of remote sensing and some geospatial, especially geovisualization of the GPS tracking data. Andrea has done a lot of work with identifying corridors and repeated segments for habitat use, and she's published some of this in Animal Behavior. She has a program that she distributes called HARM, which is the Habitual Route Analysis Method, available on GitHub. She's compared different primates, and we have also some researchers here looking at gorilla movement compared to the elephant movement. So that might be a handy tool if you're interested in looking at corridor analysis. We're identifying these corridors, and our idea is to have developers who are thinking about developing and adding new residential areas to be mindful of where the elephants are moving. And so can they relocate that hotel or that new residential area and avoid conflict in their development plans? And also we did a little bit of 3D visualization. And I like this because it shows the different elephants and whether they're overlapping in time as well as space. You can look at regular patterns of movement and when they decide to take off and go to different places. So I have some groups in the statistics department looking at this data. So the mitigation, to get into the mitigation, our researchers, especially Dr. Osborne and Malvern Cordozo, have been teaching and or developing methods to use chili peppers to extract oils and also make a mash out of them. You can see the fences around the agricultural fields are mostly made of natural materials, very easy for the elephants to break through and trample the crops. They have provided families with the chili pepper plants. Each family has a row that they tend, and they can harvest, make the mash, and they can also sell the chili if they want to. But they can use the oils. They've found the best method is to insert the oil into a ping pong ball, and then they use homemade potato launcher, basically, to shoot the ping pong balls at night at the elephants when they come to the fields. The ping pong ball breaks, and the oils in the air are sucked into their trunks. The trunks are very, very sensitive, and it burns, as you can imagine any kind of pepper spray does. So they will run away from the fields, but we don't really know how long do they stay away. Do they come back in a week? Do they avoid these for long periods of time? So we're interested in tracking their movements before and after this kind of a mitigation application. We also are using chili wax now. So our bull number 2 was at a school. He was at the Baobab Primary School. during the afternoon when parents were there to pick up the children, and there were some fruit trees that he and some of his friends were trying to get off the trees. So it was a fairly tense situation. So the Zim Parks rangers or resource managers called Malvern. He went there, he and Roger Perry, they darted number 2, and they rubbed chili wax in his trunk and mouth and very sensitive areas. That was on July 20th of 2018. The next day he went north of Victoria Falls. The day after that, he went around the city, and then he has come back to Victoria Falls, but he's never come closer than, for a long time, it was 500 meters of the mitigation site, and now he's come as close as 250 meters, but this is 3 years afterwards. He has not gone back to the elementary school. So we're trying to see how effective this is. We started the disruptive darting program about a year ago. There was another elephant that was going onto the airport runway, and you can imagine that's a dangerous situation. He had broken through the fence. He was also raiding crops in the woodlands community nearby. And then, they were able to dart him and put a collar on him and put the chili wax on him. And we've been tracking his movements since then. So in the daytime, he tends to stay within a game refuge area, and then at night he ventures out to drink and raid the crops. He has not gone back to the airport, so we're trying to see how long this will be effective. And we've actually been able to collar a bull 16, and just last week a 17 and an 18. So we're collecting data. One of the bulls, we had the collar on him, and then he was able to be darted after that and waxed. So we have some movement behavior before and after the mitigation. They're just very used to people. This elephant is just coming up and knocking over the garbage and eating it. And this elephant comes close, and just they're not afraid of people. In fact, this is bull 16. We think he might have even been from a wildlife area where he's used to people. So yeah, it can be a dangerous situation. And I'll just go ahead. I'll just move into some future work to end my presentation. We have flown a little bit of drone imagery there. We would like to fly imagery of the crops before and after a raiding event to try to quantify the amount of damage, the loss of crops. We've had some research, and this was a master's student of mine looking at small gardens in a lot of detail using drone imagery and structure from motion to develop 3D models and to measure volume of the crops to try to look at, she was looking at the growth of the crops, but it can also be damage after the crop is removed. Another thing we're interested in, and this was Dr. Langbauer's idea, is to take pictures of their footprints, because elephants' pads are like our fingerprints. There's a unique pattern of cracks. And so every time we dart an elephant to put the GPS collar on, we take pictures of the 4 feet. And the idea maybe eventually would be, if we found tracks in a field, that we would be able to identify what particular elephant it was. Because sometimes there'll be an elephant that has raided a crop, and then another random elephant is killed, and it may not be the same one that was causing the problems. And there has been some work done on this, especially looking at the shape of the footprints, and this is done by Wild Track Group. They look at all kinds of wildlife footprints, which is really interesting. But we're mostly interested in, instead of the shape, actually looking at the patterns of the cracks. And I think this is a perfect example of using deep learning to identify spatial patterns. So in addition to the disruptive darting with the chili wax, we are also looking at home ranges, overlapping ranges. Dr. Prezotto is looking at a landscape of fear. So how close do they come to human activity, roads, places of conflict. I have 2 PhD students looking at the imagery now. Kate Markham is looking at time series and mapping vegetation in a higher level of detail. She's looking at locations of conflict and using machine learning or developing machine learning models to predict crop rating. And then Molly Azami is also looking at transboundary crossings because the elephants obviously don't know about borders, but management can be very different from one country to another. So we'd like to look at drivers of moving large distances and then their use of home ranges. Another experiment we might be trying is looking at other deterrents and in the crop area, looking at rubbing the chili on fences, other smelly potions, shiny things, fences, and a control. And this is an area where there are some elephants that are being rewild. They were used for elephant rides, but now they're in a reserve area. So we may be able to set up an experiment and videotape their behavior. Their sounds can give you some indication of a sound score of how alarmed they are, or do they get habituated very quickly? How much of a deterrent would this be, and would it be useful to the farmers? So just in conclusion, our climate is obviously changing. There's more and more development, more people, need for food and agriculture. But our changing climate is causing a loss of food security, displacing people, and increasing human-wildlife conflicts worldwide. So I would say all of your research is critical. We need accurate, efficient, and operational extraction of 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional information from imagery. This information needs to be open access. We need to have online processing and dissemination of the output products to really be able to share our research and have it be useful and applied. But I would just hope you remember to trust your eyes and your brain to understand imagery, interpret the success of your geospatial analyses, and really explore machine learning and deep learning. We hope that, that what all of you are learning in your classrooms, the concepts, the theories, the exercises that you do are moved into your own research to develop new algorithms, to create and refine workflows, and then apply for applications really for our societal benefit to help local communities and influence good decisions in the future. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you are interested in some of our research that's been published, the last slide has the citations. So that's the end of my, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Marguerite, for your sharing your knowledge with us. We have some questions for the audience and for the other moderators and for myself as well.
Okay.
First, would like to ask if it is possible monitoring the elephant routes using only remote sensing images, or GPS is essential for this monitoring. In fact, the question is if the elephants made some trails that can we identify at remote sensing images.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I always like to combine ground truth with remote sensing. I like to go there myself, but the next best thing is to have people there. You can ask questions, and the tracks of the elephants just really give you that that grounding, I guess, you know, in what are the elephants doing. We've also looked at the number of GPS recording or locations. Many GPS units are collecting 1 point per day, sometimes one every 12 hours. We have done every hour, and then we've also tried every 15 minutes. So really trying to experiment with some of that. I think that really helps us to learn what's going on, and then you can broaden your perspective and look at other areas, build your models, and then see how robust they are in other areas. The trails are definitely used by all kinds of wildlife, so you really wouldn't know if it's just elephants. I mean, there are rhinoceroses, you know, there are giraffes, zebras, all kinds of wildlife use those trails. If you are flying drone imagery, you can see the elephants. And there's definitely been aerial surveys of the elephants themselves. It's interesting that elephants are very afraid of bees. So the drone sound will scare the elephants because it sounds like bees. And so some have even experimented with using drones to try to herd the elephants and move them. Yeah, I guess that's kind of a long-winded answer, but you could definitely use only the imagery if you're interested in, say, the vegetation condition, changes in human impacts, so roads and development, clearings, agriculture, you know, water bodies, remote sensing to try to detect the algae growth. We have some researchers here who are looking at that. And so, you know, if you understand a system, you can definitely use remote sensing only. But the tracking and the movement really brings the two together. That I really like that work.
Okay. We have some questions from Fabio. Fabio, could you read your question, the first one?
Okay. Very nice presentation. Thank you for letting us know about such information. Very exciting presentation, dear Marguerite. The question is about what are the major constraints to monitor the wildlife, and how I think that there are teams from different knowledge areas, how they accept such new technology, what they think about this new technology.
Oh, okay. So the constraints first. I think ideally we have in our mind that we can create a wonderful spatial temporal data set. So we can put the collars on and track their movements and compare them. But in any longitudinal study, you have gaps, you have problems with the GPS not working, you have battery issues, you know. So we have 17 elephants that are collared, but there's not always an overlap between them. So we almost have them in cohorts of different years. So just trying to have a nice clean data set is sometimes a constraint. And then the issue of the trade-off between the number of locations or recordings that are reported. So the collars will last longer if you don't transmit them very often. So when that's a debate within our team, because Andrea wants a point every 15 minutes. And the people who are putting the collars on, it's a lot of work to find the bull, to make sure that it doesn't run away, to dart the bull. It can be dangerous. We've had people attacked. We had to kill one bull who was attacking a person in our team, and unfortunately, once he was killed, they found out he had an infection in his jaw, maybe from eating garbage. So it's a lot of work to put the collars on and take them off. So that is definitely a constraint. Other animals, it may be a little bit easier, but so just kind of those practical issues. But our team is, it is interdisciplinary, so we have people who are more familiar with remote sensing and image processing and geocomputation. I would say our other team members who are very knowledgeable in elephant physiology and behavior and vegetation. They're all extremely excited and interested in the geospatial technologies, analyses. Malvern will sometimes send us a text and he'll say, I need to meet with some local people. Can you give me some maps? You know, and he'll ask for the maps. And we try to respond as quickly as we can. Another, actually, it's involved in with a constraint is that some of the data are sensitive. So we have some colleagues in Botswana, and they really cannot share the individual track data because their government is very cautious to let that out because of poaching. So you know, so that's another. You know, that's kind of a dilemma. You know, do we study their movements and make this data available? And does that help people who are not, they don't have good intentions, also understand their behavior and where they're moving, and they can, you know, more easily access them? And lately it's been killing with poison. And so that can affect a lot of wildlife at one time. So multidisciplinary teams are just, it's so exciting, and I'm really glad to be a part of this research group.
Well, we have another questions. We have one from Rorai Martins Neto. Ricardo, could you read, please?
Sure. So in loblolly pine forest plantations in Brazil, we have some conflicts with capuchin monkeys. Could you use this methodology to mitigate the human capuchin monkey conflict?
That is a very good question. So one thing is there may be a little bit more difficult to because they are so small. You know, you wouldn't want to dart them and rub them with chili wax. I wouldn't. So you'd have to come up with a way of I know. Oh, so one, maybe if you had a fence around the area or something that they were attracted to it, they got it on their hands, somehow they got it in their mouth or something, or you know, burned on their skin. You know, that could be one thing. I was in Costa Rica one time at a sugar cane plantation, and the farmer had an electric fence that was very low to the ground. And he said that was for monkeys. And I thought, well, they can just jump over it. So it doesn't seem like that's keeping the monkeys out. But he said, well, one will come over and they'll grab the fence. They'll get the electric shock and they'll be very scared and vocalize. And all the others will run away. So that was, you know, one thing. He also planted more sugar cane on the outside of his fields so that they would have something to eat and then they wouldn't get his crop. Yeah, I think you know, there's wildlife, you know, conflict. It's an issue in many places. Bears here in the United States, deer, you know, especially very smart animals like primates. You know, they learn very quickly. You know, that something is not really going to hurt them. You know, and they get a way around it. So, but I would definitely contact Andrea about that because she worked with capuchin monkeys in the Atlantic rainforest. In near Sao Paulo, and then also the capuchins in the Cerrado area, and so she's pretty familiar with capuchin group behavior, so she would be a good person to contact.
Good. And Ricardo, you have some questions. Also, you can read.
Yeah, sure. So the first one is more of a curiosity, like do elephants just walk within the Victoria Falls city? And is that common in other countries in Africa? Like I don't know anything about Africa.
Yeah. So that was amazing to me as well. So Victoria Falls is a city that's actually inside of a national park. So the people, you know, have to kind of remember that, but they don't. So there's no fences, and you're really not allowed to fence the wildlife out. So so based on the points that we see, their tracks, they come at night. They will sometimes, I had one person tell me they had a wall around their property. The elephant burst through the wall, drank water out of the pool, and then burst through the wall on the other side. So another woman who lived there told me that, you know, we just open the gate. We just let them in, they drink, and then they can come out. So, you know, in a way, there's been, you know, people have been cohabitating with elephants for a while. But in fact, just this week, a man who worked at a bar was walking home, and he got too close to a female with some cows, and he was killed. So people are walking all the time in this area, and you know, sometimes they just ignore you, and sometimes they'll be aggressive. So and you know, the observation recently of more and more lions, jaguar, and also elephants being in town more than normal, and we think it's because of the lockdown and fewer tourists and fewer people moving around. You know, they're kind of reclaiming their space almost, and coming into town more often.
Well, very interesting. Very interesting. We have another question. Maybe Fabio, could you read it from Rorai Martins?
Okay. Rorai Martins asked us to what kind of machine learning method did you use to perform this
Analysis.
Yeah.
Yes.
analysis?
So so my students have just been looking at a couple different, random forest seems to be the best. You know, it's very good for classifying, but also for predictions. And so one limitation and another constraint that we have is that there are not that many points of conflict. So we do have, you know, places where crop raiding has taken place, or there's been an attack by an elephant. So we do have those locations, but you would really want a lot of points to be able to train and then save for verification of your models. So then we're making assumptions. So we assume that when elephant tracks come within a certain distance of, say, an agricultural field or a residence or an airport or a water treatment plant, that is an area of high potential conflict. So support vector machines work pretty well, but you know, they tend to be similar, but random forest is outperforms the others.
Okay. And Ricardo, could you read the question from Fabiana, please?
Sure. Would it be possible to share a few of the thoughts about the environmental policy and governmental efforts to keep the balance between preserving conservation units and environmental corridors and both agriculture and tourism activities?
Yes. Oh, very good question. And Victoria Falls just seems like the perfect place to do this because it does have, you know, the tourism, the historical importance, you know, worldwide, international attention. Hunting is you know, large game hunting is a big issue. You know, I had my Western thoughts about that. You know, we need to protect these wild animals, and this is the last place where they live. And then when you go there, you realize what it's like to live with large animals and the danger of it. The young students who live in the communal areas, they can go to elementary school and primary school there, but they have to walk into Victoria Falls to go to high school. And it is a 10-kilometer walk. There's not a lot of public transportation. It's all dirt roads. It's hard to ride a bike. And so they are, you know, subject to buffalo and lions and elephants. So it can be very dangerous. There's a lot of attention and money being brought into the area to develop lodges and hotels and there's a big need for lodging because of conventions and big game tourism, where people come and pay a lot of money to eat at restaurants and stay in these hotels and be taken out into the bush, either to hunt or to see wildlife. So a hunter might pay $30,000 to come and to shoot one big bull who is very old and maybe, challenged and killed anyway. So local people are saying, well, if we can charge that much money and get money back into our national parks and protect our preserves, is that a bad thing? So I'm just wrestling. I'm wrestling with it all the time. But if we can identify the corridors, especially the river crossings, just don't put the hotel there. They're putting cabins on the islands in the Zambezi River, and they're advertising that you will walk out your porch and see elephants, walk by. But I don't know if the message is really getting to the tourists how dangerous they can be. I've seen pictures of a tourist with a selfie stick and is turned around with his back to the bull elephant taking the picture. And, it's just, they're not very predictable. So what we do when we go there is we collect our field data, we go out and dart and try to put the collars on, but we also have at least one afternoon where we invite local people, developers, resource managers, groups from NGOs, the professional hunters, and we get together and we talk. And it is very interesting because the park resource managers are saying to the people in the NGOs, well, our mission is to protect the people who live here. And then, other people are saying, well, why are you developing and enhancing the conflict? And you can really see the multiple perspectives, but at least people are talking. And we hope that we will provide some data and some maps to convince people that this is where this is where they go when there's a dry season or a drought, or this is what you might expect at the end of the dry season. So just to try to understand what's happening, and to think ahead with planning and agriculture and protecting crops. So.
Yeah. And Ricardo, you have another question?
Sure. Before I ask that, I was thinking about the dilemma you were talking about of releasing information that may endanger the elephants. Our group we use deep learning to map, segment 3 species in the canopy, and we also think about that because if we identify on a large scale, like very large trees with economic interest, and we release it to the public, perhaps we are doing the opposite of our research was like aimed to.
Exactly. We want to understand it, but in any of our geospatial technology, there are admirable uses and there are some that are not, could be used for, and so geoethics is so important, ethical mapping, that kind of thing. In fields like archaeology, they have been dealing with this for a long time. So I think we can see what they do, and obviously they add some geospatial uncertainty, and that is counterproductive to what we're trying to do. So sometimes I think we may be using our data in a more confidential setting, really sharing it with our own researchers and trying to understand, and then maybe extract some concepts or theories or broader principles that then could be applied, maybe without sharing the exact data.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the question I was intended to ask was, I've seen efforts on community-driven information to study birds, like lots of these databases. Do you also use that for the elephants?
So I have not so much, but I think Andrea has, and there's actually some websites that just pool all kinds of animal movement data. So that's a really interesting field to get into. So I've had some students use the iBird data. So that's, crowdsourced and really interesting. You have to think a lot about the data. Is it opportunistic? Is it, you know, there's a wide range of expertise in people who are identifying the species, say, you know, is there double counting? You know, so there's a lot of interesting geospatial questions to ask about the data themselves, and trying to filter and then really extract the truth, you know, from maybe some extra information. But yeah, we haven't gotten into that as much as I think we would like to. So, and also interspecies interaction. So not just within the elephants, but how are they interacting with other wildlife is super interesting.
Just a minute. To take some information about in South Brazil, we have several problems with invasive plants, vegetation. I don't know the name, uva do Japão, Japanese grape, I don't know. And these species give fruit just when the native forest don't offer fruits.
Yes.
So the wildlife comes to eat it, and then they are hunted. This is a big problem in several parts in South Brazil, due to invasive vegetation, like this Japanese grape vegetation. It's interesting because I think the boundary studies of vegetation can be approached to understand the wildlife hunter process. Very, very nice.
Oh my goodness. Andrea was looking at thinking about spatial cognition of the capuchin monkeys, who are the black capuchins are in the canopy most of the time. And so she would follow them as best as she could. And it seemed like they had a mental map of when the fruits would be coming in a certain area, and they would go there in anticipation. She didn't mention this exotic grape, but I can really see how that would also just you know, change the normal patterns of their foraging. And it's everything from, for example, butterfly gardens that are introduced here in the United States, trying to give you know, more food for butterflies, and yet actually these exotic plants are flowering at the wrong times, and now they're not migrating like they should. You know, so the unintentional consequences of people trying to do good things, you know, for wildlife also. But that, you know, it sounds like that would actually make an interesting experiment, and also, you know, looking at the drivers, you know, for their foraging behavior.
Yes.
Yeah. We have another question from Andreas Hernandez, but in fact this question was the first, if it's possible to identify using remote sensing imagery. And we have another question from Veraldo. Veraldo, we want to maybe Fabio, you can read the question from Veraldo, please.
Okay, sure. Considering that mapping initiatives are worth for policy issues, what are the current remote sensing perspectives to count and monitor certain key tree species important for elephants?
So I hope this is what my PhD student Kate Markham will be looking at more closely. But it actually it's an interesting area because it's savanna for the most part. So the trees are far apart. They play a very, very important role in the ecosystem. And aggressive elephants will go and knock these trees over. And in some cases, it doesn't seem to be for food. They're just being aggressive and pounding on these trees until they fall over. So there's been a lot of research on that. You know, the destructive impact of elephants on the savanna. And then another would be, you know, the particular trees that are fruiting at different times. You know, so that is a driver that is bringing the elephants to particular areas. The trees that are planted in people's yards, you know, that are maybe exotic fruits and things. So the, you know, getting to the species level is very important. One thing I have noticed is that the elephants eat everything, anything. So they eat a lot of shrubs and leaves and grasses, twigs. They have very tough digestive systems. And I've seen I could look at an area and realize this is a shrubby area that has definitely been grazed by elephants. And it's not just elephants, it's it's ungulates as well, zebra, they're all trying to find food at the same time. So I think that at the species level would be really important research. And with high resolution imagery and drone combined with drone imagery, I think that this is very, very possible to do.
Thanks.
I think that we don't have more questions from the audience. We have another one.
Yes, if you have time, I don't know. I will pull back the first question about remote sensing. Some time ago, I talked to with an enterprise about the use of planet scope data to monitor cattle.
Yes.
Because I think it's very difficult. Do you think this will be possible? Such resolution, such quality data, like planet data, planet scope data. What do you think about?
So I actually have two.
This is a commercial and is an environmental issue.
Yes, yes. So I have two students who work for Planet now. So that's kind of interesting. And I do like that the company is willing to work with researchers and provide them with data. It may not be an operational solution because, maybe NGOs cannot afford it or government or agencies, but they have a cooperative project right now with the Norwegian government and Airbus. So you might have heard of it, the Norwegian International Climate and Forest Initiative. So they are providing the orthomosaics of the planet data available for free, time series data. They're monthly mosaics of the tropical areas. So if you just Google it's the NICFI, you can find access to that data. It is a 3.7 meter resolution. And so, I mean, from my side, I would love to have the less than 1 meter resolution SkySat satellites. But it's a start, and certainly they are imaging the world every day. But if you go to look at their images, it's a lot of work to find the cloud-free images and stitch them together and make mosaics. So their orthomosaic products are extremely useful and interesting, I think, for longitudinal studies. That is a very exciting area of research. They're cooperating with Google to bring the data into Google Earth Engine. They're also coordinating with Esri. Incorporating the planet data with more and more image processing capabilities of ArcGIS Pro. And then that always moves over into the open source world of QGIS, QGIS. I think that that's another reason for us just to be ready to go with our automated processing when we have more and more high resolution imagery for these kinds of things. 3.7 meters is not enough really to see the elephants. You can definitely see impacts on the landscape. But combining that with maybe more aerial imagery or higher spatial resolution imagery for smaller areas, for right now, I think that is, that is our future. So hopefully everybody can join them as researchers. They allow. They've changed the amount, but I think it's something like used to be 10,000 square kilometers. It might be 2,500 square kilometers every month, maybe, that you could have access to. So I encourage everybody to try that out.
We can make a final round of questions. I don't know, Ricardo, if you have another one.
I don't have a question. Just like to comment that it was a very remarkable research that you and your group do around there. It's so brilliant. Like we studied mostly. I study vegetation and things that are stable, more stable over time, and you track things that are moving and try to understand it. Like it sounds very difficult to do.
Oh, but you have to put the two together. You have to put where people and animals are moving together with what is the vegetation that they're moving and using. So it's perfect for collaboration.
Maybe we'll be a great partner.
That would be awesome. That would be wonderful.
And yeah, and about your last comment on the amount of data that we have nowadays, like planet, and that I think that calls back to one of the first things you said about the visualization and seeing, believing, and understanding, like to actually visualize the data to make sure you're indeed seeing the phenomena you are studying, instead of just trying to put inside of a model and coming with stuff like.
Yeah, I call it a gut check. Just get it, and actually in your modeling process, I recommend checking every so often, not waiting until the end, to look at the product. But, if you start it, look at it and then do a little bit more and then look at it. I just think that really helps to catch some problems early on. It's just like decoding, when you're programming. It's a good idea, I think.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Sure. Oh, it's my pleasure.
Fabio want to say?
Just say thank very, very, very much insights. Your lecture bring us to very, very much insights that we can apply here in Brazil. I think you can use some ideas, some highlights you taught us. Very nice. And about the comment of Ricardo, we need a double check always, double check and coding, data, statistical approach, and a logical approach. Make it sense. Always take this in mind. Make this sense.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So I just can say thanks for your wonderful presentation, and maybe sometime I can meet you in some congress when and this COVID goes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, and I hope that there'll be more ISPRS summer schools.
Yeah.
We have the symposia and the geospatial weeks and the congresses. So yeah, our fingers are crossed that we'll be able to do that in the future.
Great.
So I would like to say thank you for our audience, and special thank you for you, Marguerite, to share your knowledge with us. Was very different that we are working here, but as Ricardo and Fabio talk is good insights, good to see different things, and was amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you, Ricardo and Fabio, for sharing with me this roundtable. Thank you, Marguerite, again. And maybe I pass to Veraldo to finish this session.
Thank you for having me. And the questions make me think of new ways to analyze our data. So thank you to everyone.
Perfect. In the name of the Brazilian chapter of the Geoscience Remote Sensing Society, I want to acknowledge all actually for our key speaker today, Marguerite, and for our committee board led by Eliana, and also Fabio and Ricardo. Thank you actually a lot. And I just want to invite actually all, let me just show again the flyer for this Thursday, the lecture with Dyer Sagar about mathematical morphology and processing and analysis of digital elevation models. So stay actually tuned in our program. We will have several lectures and activities like this brilliant webinar today. And all this material is available actually for free. So please invite also your colleagues and friends to join our event. And again, thank you all actually for supporting our event in this virtual way. And I hope that in near future, we can make it also like hybrid, but also make it presential here in Brazil. And Marguerite, I think you have been already in Brazil, but we would like to consider in future to have you attending our events and deliver it in person some of the lectures.
Oh, I love that. I look forward to it.
So with that, I just want to close actually this webinar again, saying thank you for all of you. So see you then
Okay.
next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.